Yes, let's start. I'm really, really excited about today's session, and thank you so much for joining us from very different parts of the world. So, we will be, I will start now introducing a little bit. This is the monthly Sensemaking meetup of Systems Change Finland. And Systems Change Finland is an NGO that seeks to cultivate a society that can deal with systemic and complex challenges. And our purpose is to promote the application of approaches that help people, organizations, and society understand and work with systems and complexity. And we are a decentralized volunteer group. So we are open. If you are interested, you can follow our work in LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Slack. Maybe, I don't know, Mikael, do you want to, or anybody from the Systems Change Finland group can copy paste some of the links for the others to join. And also, as we are an open community, you're also invited to become a member and take an active role with us. So it's a space to organize events and different activities around system change and foster our collective learning. Also, this is a collaborative event with design activists for Regenerative Futures. And I would like to invite Carl to say a couple of words about DARF.
Yeah, no worries. Hello, everybody. Good morning, evening, good night. So it sounds like we do have quite a good kind of breadth of people from across time zones. So it's wonderful to see you all. Yes, so DARF, I mean, it pretty much, as it says on the tin, it's we're a collective of designers from around the world who come together to explore activism in the space of regenerative futures. Very similar to Systems Change Finland, it's a completely open forum. Anybody can join to come and get involved, to mobilize, to curate activity. We have a manifesto that we try to kind of adhere to and to share, and we invite the community regularly to kind of help us shape the work. So it's a very flat, open structure. Anybody can come and get involved. We organize events probably every 2 to 3 months to kind of showcase, to share, practice. And like I say, if anybody's got any ideas, anything that they want to share, do reach out to myself or Zeynep after today. And we'll also share the, thank you very much. I was going to say, we can also share the Slack kind of channel, and you can come and get involved there. And we're also on LinkedIn. We're also on Twitter as well, but we're not terribly active there. But yeah, the best way to kind of keep up to date with our activity is through LinkedIn and our Slack group. So all are welcome.
Thank you, Carl. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Zeynep Falay von Flittner. So I'm really happy to be able to hold the space for you today and host our amazing speakers. I have these two hats, both in Systems Change Finland and DARF community. Therefore, it's really exciting to see actually people from both sides in the audience today. And we have today's igniters are Elisa Fort and Adriana Santamaría from Zonder Collective. They will be talking about their project around hosting a space to reimagine peace building. And I'm really, really inspired. And I've been hearing a little bit from Adriana before, and I felt like, okay, we need to spread the news and talk with bigger groups. And I've been kind of asking to host them into this event. And finally, we are here. So that's really interesting.
Feeling really grateful for this gathering and to see like all of the places where we are getting together from. We want to start by acknowledging where we are, as it is in the way that we inhabit spaces that we build relationships. We are in this unique to our times space across borders and across experiences and disciplines that somehow materializes through a shared purpose or interest that we call systems change. We, Elise and I, and we, all of us in our own ways.
We're really excited to have this time to take you on our journey, share that journey where we are and kind of continue the journey together. I actually wanted to acknowledge, and you are a privileged set, that is, this isn't a journey that we've shared kind of formally beyond the community up until now. And I wanted to share that part of the story because I think it talks to one of the core principles for the space of community first. And that we are incredibly conscious, even coming into this space today, of how we don't speak on their behalf. And so what we will be telling you the story of is the story of our journey as designers and facilitators, the way in which we have grappled with imagination and power within those roles. And yeah, excited to share that with the expertise amongst the group. It's been a journey that's been going on since 2020. So we waited 3 years to talk about this publicly. And it has been about us, but in this deep acknowledgement of the 25 activists and peace builders from around the world that we've been on this journey with, continue to be on this journey, really grappling with what is the system as it is today? What is that imagined system, those plural imagined futures that they would like, and how we hold a space for them to collaborate to bring that future closer to reality. We're going to share the aspirations, the way we've tried to design and bring creativity, but also hope to share some of the questions and the challenges that we're still grappling with today.
So in a similar way that this is not a pipe, Reimagine Peacebuilding is not a project. Now, it's easy to fall into thinking of it as a project because this is how we are conditioned to think. Please don't. That's a reminder to us too, by the way. This is not a project. It is a prototype, a prefigurative space, an experience where we are grappling with imagination and power.
And with that, I just want to slow us down and make sure that we have this kind of same plane of understanding. I'm really already feeling like this is a multidisciplinary space. We're landing from different parts of the world. We're landing from different disciplines and kind of put us all on the same plane. 3 things that are this prefigurative space. So Reimagine Peacebuilding is a translocal space where, as designers and facilitators, we're working in service of a community of activists and peace builders to support their process of reimagining and slowly establishing alternative systems for peace from the community outwards. And I want to really kind of focus on these 3 highlighted concepts. The first is like a translocal space. And I don't even know if necessarily the word translocal is familiar to everyone on the call. So I'll try and define that. And it is deliberate. It's a deliberate stance vis-a-vis what we think about systems change, which is we were holding a space that honored the individual local realities of each of the participants. And that we wanted that space to be an area where those local realities could be weaved together into a shared tapestry, which was a new type of global. It wasn't a global that was dominant, hegemonic, top down, but it was a global that was plural and grounded in the local. And that we think that future system that might emerge is grounded in those local realities. So this is a translocal space. But the second concept being that we as facilitators and designers are working in service. Adriana and I both have a kind of background in peace building. And I think in that space, that notion of working in service is perhaps more familiar than in other spaces. But it is like pushing the boundaries of participation to say, we are here to serve the set of people that we have around the table, and that we have a responsibility to be creative and flexible in meeting their needs as they emerge. So that's the second key concept. And then the third is from the community outwards. And the choice of the word community here is deliberate. And I think it has 2 facets. One of which is it's another stance vis-a-vis, I guess, how we see systems change, centering on lived experience. What do we mean by lived experience? Those that are closest to the issue that is at stake within the discussions, those that are disproportionately affected by that issue, and that they should and almost must be at the heart of any revisioning of the system. So there's that centering on lived experience, but the word community is also this emphasis on relationships. Adriana mentioned it at the beginning, how those set of individuals work together as a group and what they can achieve more, how they can achieve more by working together in concert. So hopefully that helps you land in the world and the principles and the key concepts for Reimagine Peacebuilding. And
in relation to that, space, so in relation to that community, who are we, Elise and I? So we are members and collaborators at Sonder Collective. From Sonder's perspective, we are co-project leads for Reimagine Peacebuilding. From the community's perspective, we are hosts of the Reimagine Peacebuilding space for the next 2 years. At a personal level, the person that I bring in to this space is, I am Adriana Santamaría P. I am a contradiction and an amalgam. I am the mix of generations of colonizer and colonized. I am a Colombian, currently an immigrant in Finland. I do design at a personal and a professional level. I don't practice design as an expert, but more as a learner, facilitator, and entrepreneur. I feel some of the impact of systemic challenges in my stomach. And I am also part of the system that creates those challenges. So I navigate the system and pursue change with a decolonial lens. My biggest learnings have been my own learnings, and they have been inspired by working at the grassroots level.
Well, now I get to tell my story. And I always love telling this story alongside Adriana, and in many ways, we're so conscious that we come from very different experiences and also united by this shared passion, and we draw a lot of energy from those two sides. My name's Liz. I struggle with this next sentence I'm going to say. I am a Brit and I live in Britain. I've lived overseas for 20 years, and so I am grappling with, I am now very domestic, and at the same time will always be a nomad in my heart, and at home in this conversation, and very much at home in Reimagine, at home in working across borders, at home in working across disciplines. I feel I spent the first 15, 20 years navigating the systems that we're talking about from the positions of power and privilege, sitting in the heart of the political system, sitting within senior roles in INGOs, sitting with the money, with philanthropy, sat on the West Coast, working for one of the richest men in the world. And that, just like Adriana, has been the source of my learnings and unlearnings. I feel like I learned around how change happens. I also learned about how change doesn't happen and how systems are there to sustain themselves. I learned about the difference money can make, but I also learned about the difference money doesn't make. And something for me that's really beautiful in Reimagine is that it's all about people and relationships and proximity, and that there's no social change without that. I have also, it sounds personal, I am queer. We are an all-woman household, 2 mums, 2 daughters, 2 female cats. And I share that here, you get to know me. But I also think I've been grappling with this. I think it's really important in terms of what's my stance vis-a-vis systems change. And I like being a disruptor, a rule breaker, seeing where we can have spaces to create and recreate and bring that to the Reimagine space and other work that I do. And then finally, I am not a designer. And so I don't share that background with Adriana, but we are united in this passion to think our roles as facilitators, as enablers. I'm very aware now, not always now, in my positionality as a white woman from the global north. What is my role and how can I center my role on lifting the voices of those that should and need to be at the heart of system change efforts. That's us.
And if this is a space that's centered on lived experience, who are we to be designing this space? Like, is it legitimate for us to design this space? So I entered this journey as a designer in 2022 under more or less a typical structure. For the sake of time and provocation, simplified as there was a funder, a design provider, and a group of interest. Funder had a vision from the realm of privilege and held a big picture view. They contracted a design agency to do the creative work in support of their vision for change. The design agency focused attention on the group of interest to understand their needs and aspirations. Important, because the process needs to be informed by them. At the end of the day, they are the ones that are going to be implementing the funder's vision. In this picture, which I imagine many of us are familiar with, the design agency is ultimately accountable to the funder. Red flag. Now, in this particular journey, the funder's vision created a paradox in the system, a positive one. They wanted this to be centered on those with lived experience. They wanted this to be participatory. So the design agency decided not to fully predetermine the process, but rather co-create it with the group of interest. Big question being, can you really co-create if you have no decision-making power?
And so kind of the fun twist in this story is in 2020, I was that funder. I was that funder that was willing to go on that journey, was frustrated by how systems change approaches were dominated by a colonial approach, but I didn't actually realize the journey that I was embarking on. I had decision-making power. I realized that the main job at the funding level was to give away as much of that power as possible. And I also realized at a personal level, the energy and joy that I got from working more proximately to building those deep relationships. And so came alongside Adriana to continue this quest of how do we create this enabling environment? How do we continue to grapple with power and imagination to put the conditions in place to really explore systems change?
So fast forward to the beginning of 2022, we have a funder committed to change in many levels and a group of interest that's connected to each other and intrigued with the process and the alternative paths that could emerge. A white canvas to use imagination and challenge power. Now, nonlinear journeys have many beginnings. At this point, we started reimagining the structure we were going to work with, transforming our own fractal of the system, imperfect and transitional. Again, in the spirit of simplification. To challenge the power in the status quo, the visions in plural, needed to be in the hands, the minds, the agendas, the table of those closer to the issues. Community needed to be at the center. For us to be more proximate to the community, we needed to be farther from the funder, work towards independency and autonomy. Being closer to the community could only be possible if we acknowledge the power we have to begin with, if we were transparent about it and actively designed how we let go of it. It being possible doesn't mean it's a guarantee. So now our structure looked like this. Aspirationally, it's a living structure. It's changing, morphing, and adapting by design. So it's imperfect because whoever shapes the process shapes the decisions that are taken through it.
So yeah, I was going to say, Adri, that's actually a bit of a lie, right? This is more of our system. So we just, before we go into kind of practically from a design level, how have we really been using our agency to shape the space? I guess we wanted to call out some truths. That is, there is this sea of isms. Is it colonialism? Is it capitalism? Is it patriarchy? Is it ableism? But that we can go through this careful crafting of a special space where we think that we can step out from the norms of the system and create from prefiguratively from the values that we want to live by and show up in the world. And yet those patterns, those dominant cultures and patterns and mindsets that exist within the system seep in and are so prevalent despite being in a reimagined space. And I think this has been one of the sort of, as we host this community, something that we continue to discover and explore together. And I was going to just give a couple of examples. I'd love to hear how you see this sea of isms showing up in your work. I mean, this is a translocal space. Colonialism is at the heart of a lot of the things that we're discussing. And we see when we're talking about the imagination, how all of us are taught in many ways to not challenge the system, to limit our ability to dare to dream. And so it's a challenge we all face, but we face there is an imbalance depending on your lived experience. To what extent is that capacity to imagine already bound? And what is our role to be able to break free from those bounds as hosts? I personally am aware in a way I wasn't previously aware of what does it mean for me to show up as a white woman from the global north in these spaces, and recognize when we are sat around the table with the community, I will still get the quiet glances and looks of whether I am approving the direction of the conversation and this kind of sense that I'm ultimately there to take the decision. And that sits really uncomfortably with me, sits uncomfortably with Adriana and I as co-hosts. But I think one of our roles is to become aware and visibilize and think, how do we all step back from those mindsets and expectations? And I think one of the core principles for our approach to systems change is embracing emergence, but how much kind of central notions of capitalism, the need to be efficient, the need to converge, the need to operate fast, the need to have predetermined outcomes, how much that seeps back in and how do we step back from it? We're not going to go further into that, but we also didn't think it was a truth to be able to say this without naming those dynamics that we're working against.
Thanks, Elise. So how does this look like in the day-to-day? We will focus on 3 areas where we are using our agency as designers to grapple with imagination and power. First, as designers in relation to the process, then as designers in relationship to the community, and then as designers in relationship to the environment. Now, from our perspectives, these interactions are representative, both of what we believe are the ingredients for responsible design, good design, social design, but also the essential ingredients for system change. So in relation to the process, we are designing the process and we are part of it at the same time. So in an attempt to untangle this complexity, we articulated our role as catalysts with a calling to design and engage in a process that challenges business as usual, that is open to plurality, that slows down and recenters on imagination and relationships. On my side, as an imagination catalyst, I connect to the community's creativity, inviting and connecting different ways of thinking, exploring the possibilities of futures, honoring the radical, the abstract, and the poetry in ideas, embracing stories as actions. Elise?
And I'm a community catalyst. And I see it's kind of my role to keep making sure that we're asking the question, how are we fostering a courageous space for the community? How is it supporting their individual journey and their collective journeys for healing, for exploration, and for growth? Because if there's not that individual journey, if there's not that shared journey, we don't believe that the pre-ingredients for any transformation is present.
So we are in this process facilitating and supporting for a transition period. We will work in service of the community without nailing ourselves to the space, but committing to handing over all decision-making power to them after a 2-year transition period. 2 years in which we hope and actively work to support them in setting up all the conditions needed for the space to be sustainable. And most importantly, while we are present in the room, we don't use our voice in the substance matter of their conversation. And we invite the community to call us out on our inappropriate behaviors. At the moment, this is personally the most challenging part of the process.
Adri, why is it challenging? You didn't know I was going to put you on the spot, but tell us more.
It's very challenging because even though these are systemic issues, even though this is the work that's done, it's directly related to your identity. So we are here not only rationalizing who we are and how we can hold the space, but we are being vulnerable in relation to the community. We are putting ourselves in it. We are putting our identities in it in a way that we are still grappling with understanding. How can we be in that space? How can we support? What does that mean? How can we be allies? How can we be in our own contradictions? So every time that we are called out, it's a reality check of, oof, it's tough work. We are doing it, and we are so blind still, and we have to continue walking, and we want to continue walking.
I'm just connecting to that and wondering how much it will resonate for others on this call. I mean, I just talked about my role as like fostering a courageous space. I think if we're talking honestly about systems change, systems transformation, in all of our various capacities, it requires a vulnerability and a bravery. And how do we, I guess it's like asking ourselves, how do we keep on sustaining the courage, being comfortable with making mistakes, and that being an inherent part of the process. I think we've been grappling with that. How do we give ourselves permission to be both courageous and fallible? So yeah, really, really central. So that was kind of us in our stance vis-a-vis the process, and I'm going to walk us through us in our stance in relationship to the community. And this is kind of where it feels like the obvious corollary of this vision. How do we center on community? I'm going to kind of explore 3 aspects of this. And Adri already flagged the first, which was, if we as hosts hold the space, the community is the driver of the substance and the driver of the vision. And so there's this really clear demarcation line, which is, this is about the mission. This is about the priorities. If this is about how the community organizes, this is about how money is spent through a fund. These are community-only decisions. And in some ways, that's the easy part. We built out kind of very clear-cut roles. So there's like leadership roles for community members to take on in defining and shaping the community and the space in their goals in service of the community. That ability to kind of take on actions funded and carry forward the work. But it also, the second part was like, how do we actually translate that into a reality? So some of those were really practical decisions. Okay, all participants get a stipend, which recognizes the time that they're dedicating and the expertise that they bring. But taking that one step further, we have 6 paid positions for at least a day a week that are at global salary scales that allow community leadership as a concept, not only to be a concept, but also a reality, that there is worked time in service of the community by its members. But it also really goes down to these what seem nitty-gritty things and yet really important, which is the details within a contract. So the work that we do with our operations team to build a contract, which, yes, legally is about how a community member is a subcontractor to our collective, but in spirit and intent is serving the community. And how do we ensure that that spirit is there within the contracts and gives them the freedom to be able to work to their vision and not to ours as Sonder. So there's been some really detailed practical work, and there's a really clear intent on centering on the community. But the final part of the story I wanted to share was also like ways in which we know this is incomplete and ways in which we know now that this is much more complex than we knew before. The first thing I wanted to talk about was accountability, because it's one thing on paper to say we as hosts work in service of the community, but what does it actually take to turn that into practice? We are playing around with concepts. We have surveys that are shared across the community on how we've been faring so far, how we need to improve. We make sure that in terms of how leadership is selected, that it's put in the hands of the community for them to collectively nominate and endorse who they want to put forward as leaders within the space. But we need something with more teeth. And what does that look like? But what does that look like without replicating traditional hierarchical systems of accountability? That's one area of exploration. The second thing that we're realizing is in centering power on the community, that we don't become naive that power also doesn't also exist within that community, that there are 25 people with different positions, different levels of influence, and I guess increasingly see our role as hosts to ensure that that is an inclusive space, that we're not creating a space where the loudest voice carries. We're not creating a space where the most articulate voice carries, where the space where the one with the best internet carries. But what are the ways in which we show up as designers and facilitators to ensure that everyone equally participates within that space? So that's the second. How do we really kind of hold power or hold space that allows everyone to hold that power within the community? And then the third thing that's super interesting is conflict. So we know that power is there and present, but what does that mean for how we actually create space for everyone to bring up difficult issues, and how they can bring up those difficult issues and we can talk about them, resolve them and transform them, knowing that we as hosts and facilitators do have more power, knowing that certain community members have more power. And we haven't come up with the answer with that. And the answer to all of these questions is, how do we co-create this with the community themselves? And how does this help them put in place something long-term that will meet their needs? And there's always this question, and it was the question that Adriana started with, who are we to be designing this process? Constantly questioning, where is our legitimacy and how do we carry that fairly? So in these examples, the principles in and of themselves are reasonable, but how do we put them forward in a way that doesn't feel like an abuse of our power and us shaping their agenda? So this is complex.
And finally, that third broader layer, that it's our agency in relationship to the environment. So in Reimagining Peacebuilding, the environment started to be shaped by a close collaboration between a funder and designers, where we shared a deep frustration of how systems change efforts on peacebuilding kept following a decolonial approach. It was through working together that we found out that we shared this ground. Through the shared experience of what had emerged in the first year of collaboration, and in connection to the potential of what could open up. We felt the trust to be able to have a close exchange of ideas of what it would take to really give the community the space to bring the space alive. There was a funder that was willing to provide a flexible multi-year finance, embracing an emergent approach to change and staying hands-off and being comfortable with accepting no predetermined outcomes. Of course, all of this throughout conversation or in conversation to understand why were these things important to be able to make of this a prefigurative space. There was a funder committed to sharing learning and hopefully building the case from here to broaden this practice. But it also leaves us as system change thinkers and designers with the challenge of how do we take our role as social entrepreneurs and work with our allies to make the case to ensure the conditions necessary for systems change, or systems transformation that they are in place? And are we prepared to challenge and even say no when they are not in place? Is that design activism? So these are some of the questions that we will continue to carry. And these are some questions that we thought we could offer you all to carry. So in what ways do you have agency to reimagine power? How have you already used that agency to challenge power? And what additional ways would you like to explore?
I'm happy to open my mouth and start talking always. No, thank you very much for the presentation. In some ways, it was nice to hear some kind of some shared pains, certainly around kind of this challenge of stepping into quite a difficult space anyway, and talking about kind of the role between the facilitator, the kind of the person that's in service to, and the community, and how do you build that relationship and find a productive way of working together that overcomes potentially some cynicism and some kind of preconceived ideas, and also that culture change takes time. And quite often, I've worked with clients of various sizes, of public organizations to corporations, and they do regularly, how do you change culture? And it's like, well, there is no way of kind of, this is the prescribed model and this is how it happens. It takes time, and it's about relationship building and finding ways together to do things. So yeah, I was really struck by the conversation about kind of who has power, and it's almost kind of like we define that power is finite, and I hate the pie analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway. Is that I've made a pie, and therefore I'm going to give you a slice of the power that I have, and we're going to just kind of divest it. And I don't necessarily believe that is the right way of viewing power. That I think that we can be more mature and more nuanced about it. And I think that everybody can have power, and it's about recognizing where there is an imbalance. And it's it's interesting that the conversation has moved away from equality, for example, towards equity. And actually, that is a really good example of how people are starting to view the role of power and the new worlds that we need to build. So I think there's definitely kind of a growing movement, a growing conversation in the general public around equity and equity practice, and I think that's going to start seeping through into communities, and actually, then recognizing that there is a new way of doing things. So now it triggered lots of interesting things and thoughts in my head. Lots to do, but also, it's good to find kindred spirits as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. Elise or Adriana, would you like to respond or reflect on what you heard in the groups, or to Carl?
Thanks, Zeynep. I mean, I think this reflection could go so many ways. First, I'm glad that there are other people doing the work there. Everyone needs to be doing the work. I resonate a lot with the idea that power is not finite. It doesn't have like an area, and it's not Elise says calls it a zero sum. It's so that we can find new metaphors to understand it. And I think that in that process, it's important that we are also always talking in relation to how other people are seeing power and how other people are framing power when we talk about it. Because if we are looking at it through a concept where it's not finite, and we think that we can all hold power, but the other part sees it as finite for whatever lived experience they go through, then I might be seizing a lot of power in having the privilege to see that power, it's not finite. And so, like, what's the positionality that I have in relation to the other person or the other institution, system, organization, to be able to say am I in the right place and at the right moment, inviting for an understanding of power being not finite, or is there a level of acknowledgement also to understand that because power has been shaped as a finite thing, you have been a victim of that, or you have been oppressed by that. So how do we understand that before opening up to these alternatives and allow for that person to maybe think of it of another way, to, this not finite way, it's also coming from a privileged perspective. So what are other alternative ways of looking at power that can coexist?
I was also thinking about that in terms of the role historical inequities have played in the very formation of our systems, and in the very kind of like the notion of who has agency over the future, which I think came up as two topics. Like we were talking about in the group sort of those that want to tweak the system. And I think from an equities perspective, it's important to start from the honest statement of, well, whose system is it? Was it built to everyone's vision? Is it a system that is owned by a privileged few? And are those privileged few the ones that are arguing that we need to first tweak what exists? And so I think there is work around futures, and systems change is also like, how do we create a landscape for shared ownership of that system and of that future? And I think we were talking about different senses of agency over the future. And one of the tools that we used that I found really fascinating, it was called the Pollock game with the community, where it maps people against their sense of agency over the future and their degree of, so more agency or less agency, and pessimistic or optimistic on the future. And I think even at the time that we did that game, I just didn't realize how much your agency is also a product of your lived experience. And if you come from a position of privilege, you actually expect that you can shape that. And so, well, what does this work do to balance that playing field? I think it's really interesting.
Thank you. I would like to ask maybe a little bit from a designer's perspective. So traditional design process and the role of designer in that you're fundamentally changing the core principles of that relationality between the designer and the designed context and how you actually engage with it. I've been having a bit similar experiences in a scientific research process where the role of a scientific researcher and this separation of the kind of observer and the researcher from the subjects has also some sort of, that objectivity has certain power issues in it. And it's really questioning a lot of things from our fundamental knowledge and how we learn to practice our kind of disciplines. So do you have any reflections? Where should the design discipline go towards, and how can we develop our competence and processes? Of course, your context has been very special in that case, but I think what you are saying also applies to any other service design project that is maybe not as vulnerable or, such a kind of sensitive areas.
I can attempt to, it's a huge question, and I can attempt to answer it from, I guess, with the broader challenge that I think this brings, and with an invitation to explore it. Because if we go back to the isms, the problem is that design it's a discipline that was created to serve capitalism. So we already started we already started under a problematic systemic circumstance to try to challenge from that space. And if we looked a little bit broader, then if we looked at these systems that were designed under colonialism, then there is this bigger understanding that we have that there is a one worldview, and that's the one worldview that's imposed on all of us. And professionalism and design as a professional discipline becomes a way of pursuing that one world vision. So with that context in mind, I think that the challenge that we have as designers and the opportunity to reinvent sits in being able to understand processes from a plural perspective, being able to live with the contradictions and allow for the contradictions to exist rather than seek for alignment or consensus or all coming in identifying one truth, one fact, one knowledge. But of course, that's very difficult because we are trained to think in a linear way. So holding that complexity, like I think that's the thing that the design discipline can't do right now. And I don't know if that's like, do we multiply the designers in a space so that there's legitimately a way to hold the diverse perspectives and continue to allow them to grow, because we are also not allowing for the environment to take decisions over the process. We are trying to take all of the decisions. But if there are multiple things moving at the same time, then the environment is going to allow for some of them to grow, and some are going to not grow. Some are going to, I don't know, like just disappear. So not necessarily a practical thought, but I think it's that we need to start thinking, we need to start imagining from a metaphorical space to be able to start enacting it.
I definitely support what Adriana's just said there, and I was going to comment that I think that it's the responsibility of every designer, and whether as a collective or individual, is to be fully aware of the biases and the limits of what they do and how they undertake things. There's a narrative at the moment, is that data is somehow kind of going to be the driver for decision making, etc. But unfortunately, data is inherently biased as well, and people think that it's somehow objective and neutral, and it isn't. The questions that we ask, the actual data itself that we collect, is often done from a particular perspective. And actually, then how do you create this? Adriana kind of mentioned it there. There's this plurality of different spaces, different queries, different perspectives, and how do we hold all of those things and then let that influence our design practice and actually create feedback loops for ourselves? Quite often, designers can get into this mindset of we're the solver, we are the creator, we are the one which will make the world better. We'll put on our superhero costume and we'll go and fix the world. And that's a mentality that it needs to die, as far as I'm concerned. And we ourselves need to be more collectivized and more plural in our thinking, our way of doing things. And I think that's so practically we've got to find a way of being more self-reflective and recognize our limits. That's my opinion.
Any other questions? I would like to give space if anybody has.
I have I guess a reflection. I don't know how to formulate yet. Just thinking about, Elisa, you said earlier that you're creating space for conflict, and that's a very complicated thing to do. And right now, hearing also this conversation, I'm wondering whether like the role of the designer also could be creating the space or holding space for conflict in a way, like embracing or creating space for conflict that can lead to new paths, or if that can enable this plurality at the same time. I mean, it's a big challenge, of course, but I'm sitting with the thought of this. I guess I don't have a question or a thought quite formulated yet, but I really like that idea, and just wanted to share.
I think you're holding the same question that we're holding for sure. I think with a belief that that capacity to manage conflict healthily is part of a transformational process, so that is part of systems change. I think what has made it more difficult for us is something that Adri described around that we are kind of holders of a process whilst also being part of that process. And I think where we become protagonists as well as facilitators, it's almost like who can facilitate the facilitators in their conversation with the community. And I think and why are we protagonists? Because there can be the facade of the neutrality of the facilitator, but the facilitator, even with deep thought, is holding so much power within this process that naturally we are part of that discussion. And so it's kind of almost one of the questions we have asked, do we need someone external to kind of facilitate where there are high tensions? And I think where that creates a dilemma for us is we're in this relationship-centric space. We're in a trust-building space. What does it mean to resort to the outsider? But I think this is our dilemma, knowing that only with healthy, transformative conflict will we achieve progress. How do we create the conditions to do that? And so actually, one of the main tasks of the community, we have two community members that are looking at a conflict transformation pact, which will be what are the values by which the community in relation with itself, as well as in relationship with the host, wants to show up to foster that environment. So perhaps we can come back in 3 to 6 months and tell you where that inquiry helped us land.
That's super interesting. It also makes me think that you've been talking about capitalism creating all the systems, and I thought a lot about how we're so averse to conflict. We try to avoid it at all costs in every setting, and how maybe it's also an opportunity to embrace that conflict and sit with it and know that it's gonna happen. We're gonna have moments of conflict, moments of different ideas, different understandings of the world, and how to humble ourselves to that, or like embrace that in the process to go forward, knowing that we're not perfect. And because I think as designers, we sometimes want to have all the answers and be that also is a position of power, and then how to remove yourself from that there by acknowledging that conflict will emerge. Or I don't know, it's super interesting.
Go ahead, Adri.
So you touch on two things that are really interesting, and there is the conflict aversion by design. Like the system needs us to be conflict averse, so we continue to uphold the system. And so the system has designed itself in such a way that conflict serves their needs. So there is a specific. So we understand context, and we understand conflict, and we imagine conflict under certain parameters of how those in power have defined how conflict looks like. So we are unable to imagine also what a healthy conflict looks like. We are unable to realize that it's it's in the conflict where the diversity can emerge. And in particular in this space, it's pretty interesting because we are working in a in the context of peace building. So the dynamics in relation to conflict also have so much deeper understandings beyond my, I don't know them, but there are so many other contexts around conflict that people are carrying that we are, or myself, I'm blind to.
I think there's just a really interesting relationship at the headline level of comfort with conflicts and comfort with plurality. That it's only in living in a world where you are embracing, like if you are willing to embrace plurality, you are willing to embrace that conflict will emerge. And the question not being, can you avoid that conflict, but rather how to deal with it. And so I think this emphasis on plurality and conflict, transformative conflicts, go hand in hand from my perspective.
Sounds like all these topics are so much connected also to self-knowledge and identity and self-work about who we are and what we are doing and why. So suddenly this is not just a project, as you said in the very beginning, but it's this whole reflection of, you know, a lot of deeper meanings of what shapes us and the system collectively. And I wonder, have you been able to welcome people to that deeper personal reflection level in this process as well? Because not everybody maybe think these are relevant. And it's also very difficult to go to that individual reflection place while we are trying to do some work as well. And how do you deal with those contradictions?
That's a great question. I can attempt to start answering, but I think this is a place where I would love to hear Elise in her community catalyst role. I think, so I'm going to speak from an imagination catalyst, and it's imagining is also an act, a self-reflective reflection act. So there are ways that we invite the community to imagine themselves as people, themselves in relation to them, but we can only invite, and we can only arrive to inviting, but how willing you are to go into it depends on each one of you. We have felt moments where they collectively accompany themselves in that self-reflective process. Not all of them necessarily engage, but I think that it's so different when we are the ones inviting versus when they are inviting themselves, and that's more powerful, and that's where this invitation should reside. And also, it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and the system currently, it's not designed to give us that time, so we struggle with that. So also sometimes, even in those invitations, sometimes those are invitations that would need more time to engage with, but we have limited time, so we attempt to do it, I think. But Elise.
I think I'd build on that to say, also put this emphasis on community. So I think what's fascinating, even emerging from the first phase of this process, the first year phase, which was, as Adriana described it, much less bold in grappling with power. But there was this notion that came forward from community members of the space feeling like it was a safe space, that it was a sanctuary. And I think there's something interesting there on the one hand, we're calling out these bigger systemic challenges that obviously pervade the space, but the opportunity, if you're fully embedded with your local community or national context, how hard it is in those spaces to be free in your explorations, to hold the questions, to entertain alternative selves, alternative ways of being. And so there is something that is powerful in the translocal of giving that opportunity to someone to extract themselves from where they are most embedded and to create a safe space for sharing with those that might be on similar journeys or grappling with similar questions without there being a stake, without it being part of your day-to-day. And so I think there's been something really in that slow, long, non-linear journey, something that they've really found in being in relationship with each other on that. And I can think of two examples of where in one question we were grappling with how they would lead and how they would want to contribute as community members. And I think the most magical part of that was their invitations to each other. So it was not that we were inviting them to really bring their full selves, but they were saying, this is what I see in you. This is where I see your potential. This might not be something you tap on normally. Please bring it into this space. So that would be one example, but just even at the, I'll give one that's more prosaic, a question about how do you grapple with hierarchy? And if you are sat, I'm going to kind of take away as many, if you are sat in a rather traditional country context that operates by a heavily hierarchical mode, and you're sat within your organization, the idea that you can have an open discussion around perhaps the ways in which hierarchy are not serving your goals, super, super hard. But if you're sat across the table for someone that's on a completely different continent and how they can describe how their attitudes towards hierarchy have shifted and what that's meant, it's sort of like that then opens up a whole new host of possibilities. And so I think what's been really magical is that kind of combination of the personal space and the personal journey and safety for that, but how that safety and courage is multiplied through relationship.
Amazing. I'm looking if there's any final questions, but I can keep talking. This is so interesting, but our time is up. And yeah, if there is no more hands up, I would like to thank you, Adriana and Elise, for really interesting space you allowed yourself to be, for your bravery and courage, and also generosity to share all these experiences with us. I think we have a lot to learn from this type of experiences, and these are very important topics to be discussed in many forums, and I'm really honored that you joined us today to this event.
Thank you for having us, Zeynep.
Yeah, I think it was a pleasure for us to be here.
Yes. So I would like to thank you also for all the participants, and also Mikhail for the technical support. And we've been recording this, so there will be a little bit editing, and then eventually in Systems Change Finland website, we will share it with some small blog post as well. And I would wish to start this type of conversation in a larger scale and spread in different networks and see what else we can do with this. So feel free to reach us out if you have any ideas and suggestions and invitations, and I will be promoting you guys to be invited in other forums as well. So it was really special talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to discover this space and such a diverse set of experiences and perspectives.
Yeah. Thank you, and have a great day or evening or wherever you are in the world, rest of your day, and keep following us, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.